Now, I'll let you know a secret. Brazilian rosewood isn't actually that great. It's not actually 3 times better than East Indian. Can you imagine a boutique builder in 2023 saying something like this? We at Mossman are disgusted with what has happened to the quality of goods produced in this country. Quality has been sacrificed for quantity, mass production has gotten out of hand, craft has almost completely been eliminated from our society. This vile abomination, plywood, is currently being perpetuated on the unsuspecting guitar-buying public on a grand scale. We at Mossman considered plywood briefly one day and unanimously decided that plywood makes the best cement forms available. We do not know now, or will we ever stoop to the level of plywood construction, and we apologize for our contemporaries who have lowered the station of our craft by using laminate back and sides. This is a deep dive into Mossman guitars because I have 2 incredible Mossman guitars. I have both, a Great Plains and a Tennessee Flat Top. Excellent guitars. They've blown me away, and I want to talk about them, and I want to share the story of Mossman. Now, a lot of this comes from a really excellent article from Vintage Guitar Magazine. Now, this article is from 2001, so there's at the end of this article, it says that they're currently in production. I don't believe they are. I'm going to continue doing work after this video. If they are still in production, I'll put the most recent contact information in the description down below. More than likely, it looks like they went out in a beautiful, prophetic, it's a crazy story. So buckle in, let me tell you the story, then I'll show you these 2 guitars. 1965, Winfield, Kansas, S.L. Stewart Mossman starts making guitar prototypes in his garage, in his basement. He really likes these guitars. He wants to find a space, basically what we would call boutique guitars. There are other brands that started right around this. Gallagher started, I believe, in 1965. But in 1965, Mossman is beginning to make guitars because they're seeing that there are companies that are continuing to lower the quality of their guitars, but the prices are staying about the same, and he finds this to be offensive to his sensibilities, and he wants to make the best guitar that he can. So in 1970, he starts full-on production in Winfield, Kansas, making incredible guitars. There were main models that came out. I have notes just down here if you see my eyes move. So number 1 was the Tennessee Flat Top. This was $350. This was a mahogany back and sides, spruce top. This was an 18 style guitar. Later on, it got a little bit more ornate with different bindings and different trim on the top of the guitar. A pretty straightforward kind of 18 style guitar. The second model that they offered was the Flint Hills. Now this sold for $450. Now this was similar to a 28 style guitar. Had rosewood back and sides, had white binding, had a spruce top. Still a really good guitar, $450. The Flint Hills Custom only existed for a few years. It didn't seem to be a line or a product that stuck around that long. Basically, it was the Flint Hills, but it had some custom features like had snowflake inlays, had gold tuners, had a couple nicer appointments to it. The Great Plains was $875. This was their flagship. This was the best guitar that they offered. Brazilian rosewood back and sides. Now, remember, this is the 1970s. This is after Martin is no longer doing Brazilian. I don't think Martin was doing any of the custom orders yet. So if you wanted a Brazilian dread, you only had a few options. Them, Gallagher, a couple other brands that were still around in the early 70s at this point. But spruce top, Brazilian rosewood back and sides, herringbone. This was just, hindsight as I'm looking at their brand, this was the bluegrass canon. This was the loud, bassy, full tone, herringbone. This was everything that, the good old boys would want. Now this guitar was $875. One of the biggest things that concerned Mossman as they grew was the quality of materials available to them and just the pressure to put out so many guitars. And they limited themselves that the most guitars they would ever make is just the maximum amount that Stewart himself could approve, could review, could do final inspections and check on the guitars. And it sounds like he was very meticulous and would not put out a guitar if it didn't meet his standards. So a lot of guitars ended up getting put back into reworking or just never were released to the public. Now this also limits the total output of guitars they ever could have made. But when you're going up against, I mean, think they're going against Martin, they're going against Guild at that point, they're going against Gibson, all of which are putting out 20,000. I think by the early 70s, Martin was hitting 20,000 guitars a year. These guys were hitting several hundred a year. I think they say 8 to 10 is the most they could ever finish today, because practically Stewart couldn't review and couldn't do the final inspection on more than 8 or 10 guitars in each day. As production grew and Mossman grew, they ended up having two catastrophic things happen to their business that they would never fully recuperate from. Number one, there was an incredible fire. The building where they do all of their final finishing caught on fire and it completely burned down. Now with that, very few completed guitars or guitars that were in process were in the building at that time, which is a strange mercy, but there was a much deeper devastation when they realized that all of their Brazilian rosewood stores were in that building as well. So that severely limited their ability to make Brazilian rosewood dreadnoughts moving forward, and that was just a thing that Mossman would never actually be able to recover from. Now the second thing that happened, as they finally get back on their feet and they start putting together a guitar brand again, not offering Brazilian but moving to East Indian rosewood and continuing to put out as many guitars as they can, guitar brands are getting to where they do not want to be in the business of selling guitars, they want to be in the business of building guitars, and so it becomes easier for them to work with a distributor. Someone who would come in and buy dozens to hundreds of guitars each year and then manage their relationships with dealers, that they would push out new products, they would really have a specific sales focus, that they could work with shops to get certain brands moved and certain guitars into the hands of players. The company that they partnered with was Kahn. This was their distributor. I'm assuming, I don't know this for sure, but I'm assuming this is the same Kahn that sells trumpets and saxophones and band instruments, and they're just large in that distribution world. Now, this company partnered with them, and by the mid-70s, Mossman was making about 150 guitars a month. So that works out to a substantial amount of guitars that are gonna need to live with someone or be accounted for, handled, before they get into the hands of musicians around the country. Now this involves putting them in storage. Now Kahn, and in the mid-70s, was located in Nevada. And so what they were doing is they were putting these guitars into warehouses. Now this is the first brand that they had that involved lacquer finishes and all solid wood materials. And so these guitars were put into a warehouse in the desert, that the guitars, and this is the words of Mossman himself, they would bake during the day and they would freeze at night, and this would cause finishes to crack, and then this would also cause bodies to break up and to crack as well. So you have checked finishes, you have destroyed bodies. Now this then flooded the market with damaged guitars. These guitars, there was a large dispute, a large lawsuit about who is responsible for these. There was no amicable resolution, it looks like, from everything that I've read. And what happened is, it looks like most of these guitars ended up having to come back to Mossman in Winfield, Kansas, and then they would be rehabbed. But according to the article that I read, there are lots of these guitars that made it out with heavy finish checking, heavy cracking, body cracks that had been repaired. And so I can't imagine that would devalue the brand that you'd worked so hard to build so much that you would never quite recuperate. As of the time of this article, which was written in 2001 or 2002, they said that they were being moved to Texas and that production was in Texas. I can't find any current stuff. I mean, we're 20 years past that. It looks like Mossman is just a memory, a prophecy. So it is interesting to me that that Mossman made these prophecies, and that's why I've kind of jokingly called this video the Mossman Prophecies, because he stood on the precipice of the boutique guitar market and he prophesied things that have definitely come true. He has seen that the big brands will start using more and more laminate guitars, and that it is an insult to guitar players. Now that's heavy language. I wouldn't put it that way, but I would agree if someone else said that. Yeah, it's cowardice, isn't it? I think that laminate guitars, they're fine. There's a place for them, but I think that there is nothing that sounds better than an all solid wood guitar. If you adjust up for inflation the prices of these guitars, they're not far off of what you can still currently get some of these similar guitars. Now, not all of them, but some of them. So the Tennessee flat top was $350, adjusted for inflation, $1,900. Now the Flint Hills was $450. If you adjust that for inflation, that's $2,500. I don't know of any builder in the US that you could get an East Indian rosewood and spruce top dreadnought with a hard case. These also came with hard cases for $2,500. That's, yeah, still incredible deal. You wouldn't be able to do that now. If you do the Flint Hills custom, that was $650. That would be $3,600. Now here's the one that really is unattainable in 2022, 2023. This is the Great Plains. The Great Plains is $875. If you adjust that up for inflation, that is $5,880, which that's a lot of money, but still, to get a modern Brazilian dreadnought, $12,000 to $15,000, $18,000. You're not going to find this. And it's just, they have become a bit of unobtainium. Now, I'll let you know a secret. Brazilian rosewood isn't actually that great. It's not actually 3 times better than East Indian. It's pretty, but if you want pretty, there are plenty of great options. You can get figured mahogany, you could get maple, you could get tons of different tone woods that are beautiful. Have you seen Koa? Koa is freaking astounding. That is the story of Mossman. It's an incredible story. It is a long and unfolding story. Now, I did skip over some details. I'll put a link in the description down below to the article that informs so much of this. And thanks to Vintage Guitar Magazine, this is the Tennessee flat top. This one's from 1975, so towards the end of the production run. And so with that, it has a couple more beautiful and more ornate things. But let's talk about this guitar. I'll give you my first reactions, just seeing it, feeling it, and then I'm going to play it for you. Number one, this guitar feels, it feels like a moment. Like, I know when this guitar was made, and I know who this guitar was made for, and I know what guitars they were trying to emulate, refine, make better, put into a better delivery system for guitar players. This guitar feels like it's 2 or 3 guitars really melded together. Number one, it's definitely a D18. It definitely feels like a Martin style guitar. Everything about it, from the mahogany and the spruce to the black binding. But it doesn't stay there for very long. Maybe the Grover tuners, these were like an aspirational kind of thing that would have happened in the mid-70s. But after that, the neck profile in particular really reminds me of a Guild. So the other guitar is like a D40. This guitar in 2 ways really feels reminiscent of a Guild. The neck profile, very round, very C-shaped, very approachable. Then the second thing is the scale length. This guitar has a 25 3/4, 25 5/8 scale length, so it's a little longer than a Martin, and you can feel it. There's a little more strength to the strings, there's a little more tension, and then the third guitar that this really feels like they're kind of pulling in the same direction is a Gallagher. I mean, let's talk, for sure, this is a G50, so just that pickguard is so similar to a Gallagher, and you can see that these are kind of the first couple boutique guitar brands that are showing up, and the one place that they really felt like they needed to change up the design and the aesthetic will be the pickguard. So between the headstock, which let's also talk about that headstock, that is so Guild for sure. It's just a little, I mean, that must be the hardest part of a guitar to design, to come up with a unique shape. But here we go. This is the Tennessee flat top. So this is an interesting guitar. This has a South Wind neck, and it's on a Great Plains body. So the Great Plains is a D35 kind of style, so a 3-piece back. Let's talk about this guitar in its specs. Sitka spruce top. This is a 3-piece East Indian rosewood back. Then the neck is from a different guitar. So I kind of suspect that this is probably one that was in the warehouse that got destroyed, that got damaged, and ended up. So it seems like maybe a neck came off of a guitar and a body came off of another guitar. I could be totally wrong. That's all speculation. But this is a good looking guitar for sure. I think the bridge may have been replaced because there's just like an outline all around it. I could be wrong. There's also a really substantial amount of checking on this guitar, and it doesn't look like new checking. So maybe this one got checked up sitting in a warehouse, but let's hear how it sounds. I mean, these guitars are like almost 50 years old now, and they still are just, I mean, they're growing old really gracefully. So anyway, thanks to Jeff for letting me borrow these. Overall, my impressions, they're really exceptional guitars. I can feel the moment that they came from. They came from this moment of Guild and Martin and Gallagher, and they're fun guitars. And yeah, I'm very thankful that I got to borrow these. And yeah, it's a cool guitar to know more about. So thanks for checking out Mossman Guitars. And man, those prophecies were right.